Okay, so that's just a brief on the statistics, just to give you an indication of the pace of transformation and why we need to hone in on it and really do something about it. But I think it's also critical to talk about Chapter 2. Often when we talk about employment equity, people think affirmative action. Okay, so just for clarity, Chapter 3 of the Act deals with affirmative action. Chapter 2 deals with diversity and inclusion. And for me, I think part of the role of the Commission really is to comment on progress, but what's more important for me as a person, the work that I do, is to work with Chapter 2. Chapter 2 deals with inclusivity, and that is where you find policy and practice. That's where really the tar hits the road in organization, and I think we're going to spend a lot of time today talking more about Chapter 2. Because of the slow level of transformation, we're currently busy with amendments, and some of you who are really involved in this field may know and may have made comments in terms of the public engagement around this. We've come up with what we call Section 53. Section 53 in the Act was not promulgated, okay? So it just sat there, but it was not enacted yet. So as a commission, we've made a recommendation to the minister that we will enact it, okay? And Section 53 says the following: an employer can make an offer to conclude an agreement with any organ of state for the furnishing of supplies or services to an organ of state and for hiring and letting of anything. But in order for them to do that, they must, if they're a designated employer currently is an employer who has either or both 50 employees or more, or a particular turnover, as in one of the schedules in the Act, which says in this field, if your turnover is beyond this, then you're considered a designated employer. So a designated employer has a duty to comply both with Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. A non-designated employer, remember I said Chapter 3 talks to the Act, to the affirmative action, right? So the Act says if you're a designated employer, you have an obligation and a responsibility to ensure that you are representative of the demographics of the workforce, that EAP that I shared with you. However, if you're a non-designated employer, that means you have less than 50 employees and or a particular turnover. You have to comply with Chapter 2, which I shared with you, and I said it talks to inclusivity and management of diversity. So with both, what we're saying in Section 53 is that we want to introduce both a carrot and a stick because transformation has been slow. And up to now, when I talk we, I'm talking about the Commission. Obviously, this is not the, I don't stand here in that role, but I'm sharing that with you in terms of where we're going. In terms of transformation. So we're saying we're introducing a carrot and a stick by promulgating Section 53. And what Section 53 says is, as an employer, you must do these things, comply with Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. And if you want to do business with organs of state, you will need a certificate that says you comply. So very much the BEE story, you know the BEE certificate that enables us to do business, we're introducing that. And we're saying, if you do not comply, then you can't do business with government. So people ask the question, so what about people who don't necessarily do business with government? But then the story is, remember, at the end of the day, this certificate has an implication for your BEE scorecard. And anybody, private organizations or government, would want to do business with people who are compliant because it impacts on their own ability to do business with government. So this will soon be in place. I could share a lot about this, and if we get time, we can talk about that at a later stage. So that's what we're seeking to include. Why then are we marrying chapter 2 and chapter 3 in compliance? Remember that up to now, when we talk about reporting, it's primarily the focus has been on chapter 3. It's been, what are your numbers? How far are you from your plan? And what we realize is one of the barriers is really non-compliance to chapter 2. Okay, and I'll talk to how a bit later and my thinking of where the real problem is. But this is a very interesting slide because then it demonstrates what the issues are if the two are not married and if employers don't seek to put the two together. So on this axis, you see you've got targets, whatever your targets are per occupational level. On this axis, you get people management and diversity inclusion. So what we say is, and what research has proven, is that if you're low on targets and low on creating an inclusive environment, you're not willing to change, and therefore you don't change. And I've spoken to people who are in this category. I've had people say, look, this is my business, and I'm also entitled to my human rights, and therefore if I don't want people, I don't want them, and there's nothing you can do to make me do it because I don't do business with government. Okay, so that's the guy that's in this category. Then you get those who push the numbers, the guys who are seeking to find the people, and then they find them. And their numbers look good, but the more you go into the organization, the more you realize that there's absolutely no transformation. It comes in different forms. You come across employers that really border on or are pretty racist, or you get those that seek people who are different but who are more like them. Okay, so one of the symptoms of this is how some organizations who are predominantly from the white race would look for coconuts, right? So they would find people who talk like them, who walk like them, and being in recruitment, I understand that very well. Let me tell you how it plays itself out. So I look at CVs on my desk, and then amongst these CVs, what catches my eye is that this guy says, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And I myself am a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm like, 7-day Adventists are perfect people. They don't cheat, they don't lie, they don't miss work, they're perfect. So even before I look at the other requirements, I already put their CV to the side. Okay? Or it plays itself in other things like class. So St. Mary's School for Girls, Waverley, I went to that school. The most intelligent people go to that school. This girl is going to be a perfect fit. She understands my language. You know, we do things the same way, we're polished. So there she goes. We're going to interview her. So that's how it would play itself out. So the compliance is very superficial. It's not real, because if you look at that first slide of that girl who does her thing on the stage, it would be like, look, we're done with baboons, okay? You don't belong here. And that's how it works. So the compliance is very superficial. Then you get the third type of group, which sort of manages the diversity, in inverted commas, but really they're not bringing in the people. They claim to be diverse. But when you interrogate the diversity, it really doesn't speak to the spirit of the act. And that on its own is also problematic. But what we're really looking for are people who effectively manage employment equity, which then brings us to looking at both chapter 2 and chapter 3, and thus leading to a transformation of an organization. So you have that first slide where that girl, does her thing on the stage, and the VC says, kind of cool, right? This is us. This is what South Africa is about, and we love and embrace that. And it's okay to be you. That girl comes and says, this place feels like home. Okay.
Can you give an example of that bottom right, that self-delusion?
So one of the guys, in 2017, we did stakeholder engagements. And the balance was very difficult to strike. So we had people in the room and people were talking about what they're struggling with. We wanted to get that in order for us to know how to change policy, to make it more meaningful and to implementable. So this guy says, look, my organization is diverse. We've got a lot of Afrikaans male, Afrikaans female, English female, and we've got Indians. If you want to call Indians designated and you call them black, then you've got that. I don't know what you're on about, asking me to employ black engineers. Where do I find black engineers? After all, you know, as white people, our fathers used to get together with us and teach us how to fix cars. And that's where we learned the skill, you know, to be technically inclined. But they never had that exposure. They never had that kind of experience. So where do you expect me to get them? You know? So I did go to St. Mary's. And in our time, there was a quota. There were only 7 black people in the whole school. And one of the things that I still remember is how the white girls would say to me, yeah, Tabia, you know, talking about the cleaners, by the way, don't worry, but you're not like them. You know? And that's what it is. And the quota, why 7? You know, how did we get to 7? Why do we need to regulate it? And those of you who know me will know that I'm very loud. And I never fitted in. Can I tell you that the last time I went to St. Mary's was when I was in the school. I've never been back because it has just never felt like home. You know, I was a total misfit. I was miserable as a child in that school, but I made it work. And looking back, they can call how many alumni events, I just don't go. It never felt like home. I don't identify with it. So yeah, that's the kind of, does it answer your question?